So how things going on over there in Boston?
Things are actually doing pretty well. As you may have read, that the vaccination program in the United States has gone well, but it's been very different among different states. So fortunately, Massachusetts and surrounding states have done very well. So I just get the feeling that we're entering a new normal. Having said that, it's clear that not only in the United States, but globally, it won't be over for any of us until it's over for all of us. So there's still, I think, as a world, we have a long way to go.
So you are a very eminent member of the Howard University. So how things are going on over there? Are you providing any physical classes over there, or is it still going online?
For the last year, all courses have been online. So whether it's a large course with undergraduates or individual meetings with students, it's all been online. The plan is to go back to in-person teaching in September, and I think that will happen. But in some ways, it's been hard. I would much rather be in the room with students, because you can sort of read the room as you're trying to teach and change in real time. On the other hand, it allows things like what we're doing now, and there's been, I think, a lot more, at least in my life, sort of international engagement in teaching and research, which is one of the things that we've learned how to do better, that I hope will continue.
Yeah, that's great. And so you were saying from September to onward, it would be the in-campus classes. Howard will start providing those. That's wonderful.
Yes, that's the plan.
I mean, if we put it in a nutshell, so how was your overall experience of teaching online?
I would say it was better than I anticipated. I think one of the things that it does is forces the instructor to really focus on what's important, because you can't have quite the same level of instruction that you might have if you had students that you could talk to in real time. But what it does that's good is forces me to say, what's really important? What is it that I really want these students to understand? And that focus, again, that's something that should continue as we go back to classroom teaching.
Yeah, of course, I totally understand that. But anyways, when we talk about the online classes, so if I ask you the question, what was the strength in the online classes? I mean, in the physical classes, we can have a big size batch. Over there, we are interacting with the student. But what about the online classes? How many students were there when you were teaching? Was it the same, just like in your physical batch, or was there any difference in the online classes?
It was the same as it would have been had we been doing courses in person. So the particular course that I taught in the spring was a fairly small course, about a dozen students. I also did, individual tutorials with undergraduates. So, excuse me, that, I'm not sure that there's any strong difference between online and in-person teaching that relates to number. Although I think if you have 500 students in a class, there probably isn't that much difference between online teaching and teaching in person.
True. Yeah, good. All right. So tell us about yourself. How long have you been in Howard? I have read your description over there, your detail that like right after completing your education, you joined the Howard, and after that till now you are still the member of that. But tell us your story in your words. We want to listen to that.
Okay. Well, I grew up in a rural part of the United States, and when I was 18, I never thought twice about going to university. But I'll have to be honest in saying I had no idea what I wanted to do in life. And because I grew up in a fairly rural setting, I knew that there were a couple of professions. You could be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, basically. And since I knew I didn't want to be a doctor or a lawyer, and I was good at math, I went to engineering school. And then at the end of my first year at university, I knew I didn't want to be an engineer either. So that made this kind of existential crisis. And so what happened, to be honest, is the beginning of my sophomore year, I took like 5 math and science courses and audited another, just hoping that something might stick. And wonder of wonders, 2 courses really captured my interest. One was a course on geology. I thought it was fascinating that the Earth has a history written in rocks and we can understand that history.
That's
And the
wonderful.
other was a course in biology. And in maybe the only real insight I've ever had in my life, I was sitting in my room one night, and it dawned on me that even though they were taught as very separate disciplines, there were a lot of ways in which earth science and life science are 2 sides of the same coin. And that interest in integrating earth and life sciences just stayed with me ever after. I was fortunate to do my PhD studies at Harvard, and I've taught there for 40 years. And being in both the earth science and biology departments and doing the best I can to, help life scientists understand that the Earth is not a passive platform in which biology operates, and to help earth scientists understand that life exerts a strong influence on conditions at the Earth's surface.
That's wonderful. All right. So tell me, just as you mentioned that you did not decide it, and you decided earlier that you don't want to become an engineer or doctor, but eventually you came into this teaching profession. So what were your expectations from this profession before you joined it, and how you found it?
Now that's a good question. I think when you're a graduate student, it's this wonderful world where you can actually spend most of your time thinking and doing research. And many of us, including me, thought, well, being a professor will be great because I can spend all this time doing research. But of course, when you're actually a member of the faculty, you have many other responsibilities.
True.
Foremost, of course, teaching. And I will say I love teaching since I first started. I think working with students is a special privilege. But you also have to contribute to the running of the university, and you have to contribute to the welfare of your discipline. So I think what I didn't fully appreciate was all of the legitimate demands on my time beyond the expectation that I should do scholarship. And it's worked out. I have no regrets about any of this. I have, by the way, 2 days ago retired. And so I can keep on doing science, and now I can do what I thought I would do when I was 26, and that is focused mostly on science and writing.
Well, Andrew, it means we deserve your retirement treat. I mean, it's a very common culture over here that whenever you achieve something, you have to offer a treat to other people by spending a lot of money and all. So we also expect that thing from you. But anyways, it's just a joke. Moving on. Now tell me, Andrew, how did you find when you became a teacher, and specifically in the Howard University, which is one of the best universities in the world? What do you think? What had made Howard as Howard one of the best university? What are the things that you practice over there in Howard University, which is not getting practiced in other universities, or what you have learned as a teacher in your university, what other teachers in other universities they usually do not learn?
Well, I don't know that Harvard is special in that regard. And I should say that my first teaching job was at a place called Oberlin College in Ohio in the United States, which is what in the U.S. is called a liberal arts college, mostly for undergraduates. And there I actually learned to teach because teaching was the primary responsibility of faculty. And I would talk to other faculty and I'd say, I have a problem here. And they'd say, well, try this. And I think like anything else, teaching is you can read all the books you want, but it's when you're in the classroom, it's trial and error and just learning what works, and what works with one student might not work with another.
True.
So I think, that's something that good teachers do around the world, and Harvard is not special in that regard. I think our great privilege comes from the fact that Harvard is a very old university, the oldest university in the United States. It has developed a reputation for excellence, and that actually really makes it a magnet. So we get wonderful students. It's just been a privilege to work with these bright, disciplined, motivated students, and we're able to attract very good faculty. So when I don't know something, I can usually walk down the hall and find someone who is an expert in it. And I think it's that, not only having a magnet for excellence, but then there is an expectation that people will work hard and contribute to that excellence as best they can. And that's a great motivating thing. I would hate to be lazy at Harvard. It wouldn't be.
That's great. That's a good answer. You have used two terms, by the way, and I'm going to ask you questions from that. The first one is Howard is more like a magnet. That's true. I agree with you. Second thing is because of the Howard result, Howard always gives the excellent result in the form of the students, of course. How do we get this excellence? What is the key of getting that excellence? Which is not very common in we are not talking about the universities in America only. We are talking about universities in underdeveloped countries as well. What difference can they make so that they should also get that excellence? And it's not only about getting the fame globally. It's also about producing students who are really, they are productive now. They have achieved something which they really wanted to achieve.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's something that I think all universities throughout the world, and perhaps, as you say, particularly universities in countries that are still developing rapidly. And I think it is something where opportunity produces results which beget more opportunity. So I think if you can, at a regional university in, say, Pakistan, get some students who you invest your time in helping them, they go out into the world and do good things. There's no better advertisement for a university than the success of the students. So I think if faculty at these universities can really invest in helping, bright young people be trained to go out into the world and do something well, that will attract interest from more students who are eager to start university, and with luck, that will build on itself so that the university will both attract very good students. And, believe me, professors want to teach where there are good students. And so good students will attract good professors too.
That's wonderful. All right, moving on to the next part of this interview. Just tell me, what is your perception about the childhood education?
Well, I think it's critically important. I think for all countries, whether rich or poor, investing in education is probably the foremost thing we can do to help our countries in the future. And the earlier, the better. I think that if we can reach all students at a young age, 4 or 5 beginning, I think that will help them throughout their lives. And I also think it's important the way we teach them, perhaps especially at an early age. For many years and in most countries, education was seen as imparting a set of skills that people could use to go out in life. And skills are important. You can't contribute to society without a set of basic skills. But I think the most important thing you can teach anyone is how to learn. Because your need to learn will not stop when you finish your education. It's a lifelong process. There's a famous saying that if you give a man a fish, you'll feed him for a day, but if you teach him to fish, you'll feed him for a lifetime. And I think that's very important for education, and I think it's something that we want to help young people with as early as we can.
That's wonderful. All right. Just as you have mentioned that every country, rich or poor, they should invest into the education and specifically the childhood education. What does that mean? The investment, is it only the financial that you were talking about, or is there something else that we also need to invest into this?
Well, for better or for worse, money is not irrelevant. And I think investing in education may mean that you cut back on investments in other areas. But if I look at my own country and recognize that the government probably spends, thousands of dollars on weapons for every dollar that's spent on education, I think all of our countries might well think about what really is in our country's best interest, and I would put education at the top. But again, it's not just money. I think it's really countries making the decision that this is important and allowing the citizens to, in some ways, reorient their lives in a ways that reflects that. I think in all of our countries, including my own, there has not in the past been equal access to education. And again, bright minds can come from people whose faces look very different. And I think that we need, as countries, to recognize that it's in our best interest to, educate everyone. So yes, there is a financial commitment that goes to excellence in education, but I think there's also a social commitment that says, we need to include everyone. We need to make the population see education as important.
That's good. All right, and you were also mentioning that few like education system should also be teaching few of the skills to the student, just as you mentioned one of the skill which is on the top of the list, that is learning how to learn.
Education can't stop when you leave school and go out to work. There's a need in all of us to continue to be educated through life, and that requires that we actually understand how to learn. And so if we can impart that to young people at the beginning of their education, I think the consequences for that for all of our students will be enormous.
True, true. That's a very good answer. When you say learning how to learn, what exactly do you mean by that? It's a very easily understand, self-explanatory term that we understand that learning how to learn, but how can we apply this skill on all the skills? Just as you were mentioning that your education is not only related to your school time, your college or university time, even when you're out of that university, when you are in the real-time market, you need to learn a lot of skills. So if you give it, I mean, if you put it in a nutshell, so what is this skill in brief? That learning how to learn, what is that?
Well, I think that the capacity to learn how to learn comes from going beyond memorizing facts and trying to understand how we arrived at the knowledge that we have. So I can say to you, birds pollinate red flowers, and you can learn that as a fact. On the other hand, you can say, well, how do we know that? What kind of experiments and observations have led to this general understanding that red flowers are usually pollinated by birds, and what are the consequences of thinking of that? So in some ways, I think learning how to learn really encompasses going beyond just a recitation of facts and imparting some sense of how we know what we think we know. And equally, I think we need to be honest with students about what we don't know.
And just as you're saying, learning how to learn includes that you should ask more questions, you should go into the depth. It's not only about memorizing the concept, it's about understanding it thoroughly, completely, deeply. That means you have to create the curiosity.
Yes. And again, if I had to pick one trait that correlates most with success in the fields I know about, it is curiosity. And I think, the good news is that children are naturally curious. I don't think we have to teach children to be curious. Unfortunately, in many of our countries, including my own, early education is so focused on memorizing facts and getting these skill sets that it almost drums curiosity out of a student. So I think when I think about early childhood education and education beyond that, I think we really want to include in the curricula things that will foster curiosity in students, things that will, reward them for being curious. I could not be a scientist without curiosity, because science is really a disciplined way about asking what we don't know. And so if you're not curious about the world, you shouldn't be a scientist. And so let's help students to, sharpen and retain that capacity.
That's good. So just as you were saying that we usually take this for granted, this skill as for granted, the curiosity thing, that we do not let student ask the question in the childhood education. Rather, we ask them to memorize the content, what is written over there in the book, and this is the pattern. You should do it. You should practice it, rehearse it, and all. But now my question is, what could be the role of a teacher in the childhood education to make it the perfect one?
Well, perfection is a pretty high bar for all of us, but I do think that when we train our teachers, when we educate them for the important job they're going to do, that in addition to making sure they know how to learn and can help students to understand that, is to make sure they understand the importance of curiosity. And I'm sure that the people who teach teachers can actually give them tips on how to foster curiosity in students. I think, for example, it's very easy, even with 5 and 6 year olds, to have them do simple experiments. We're not talking about nuclear reactors here. We're just talking about something that they can do on a tabletop and, make predictions. If I do this, what will happen? And get the students to think about that and become curious about what might happen, and then do the experiment. So I think there's a lot of things that teachers can and should do to help students to recognize that being curious is actually a very good thing.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So it's more about the teacher responsibility to help them build this trait, this skill. It's not the student himself he's going to work on it, because they naturally have that talent. It's only the
I think they do. And the other group of people who can be very helpful here are, of course, family. That, a student spends more time with his or her family than they do with teachers. So parents and siblings and grandparents and uncles and aunts can all play a role in this by being curious themselves, so that kids have, role models, if you will, for that, and, interacting with youngsters in ways that show that you value curiosity.
Very good, very good. Yeah. So it means it's a game that we all have to play. It's not going to be a one man show. Everybody has to play a part in it. That's a wonderful approach. Now, moving on, tell me, you have seen the Howard professors, you have seen the teachers in USA over there. What do you see in your observation? What are the good qualities of every teacher that I believe everybody should have? Every teacher should have those qualities, in your perception, in your observation.
Yeah, that's a good question. And let me say at the outset that it's possible to be a good teacher in a number of different ways. I don't think there's just, one size that should fit all here.
Yeah, good.
Nonetheless, I think things that are required of a good teacher would include competence. I think you can only be a good teacher if you understand what you're teaching. So
Good.
that's important. I think clarity in
Hmm.
explanation is
Hmm.
important. So it and it does, in my experience, it takes time to figure out how to introduce a potentially complicated subject
Hmm.
in ways that students can understand and pick up. And then I think the other thing that's so important is, good teachers care about their students.
Hmm.
In my own career, I can't think of anything that I've done that has been more satisfying than
Hmm.
actually helping students to learn, and with graduate students helping them to become
Hmm.
professionals. And I think if you have teachers who fundamentally don't care, they should be doing something else.
Yeah, good. So they are quite, I mean, we usually find accidental teachers here in our society, in our education system. So yeah, they should not be there, and there should be a proper check and balance from the institution, from the government as well. The people who are really dedicated toward this teaching profession, only they should join it. Now tell me how the teachers can keep them moderate, and they can be something which is in trend, and they can have all the latest information, latest example that they can relate. Even if they are teaching the history, they should be able to relate it with the present. How do you see what teachers should do for that?
Well, again, I think it's important that teachers recognize that they are lifelong learners. And I think that institutions can help teachers greatly by providing uh, courses that the teachers can take every now and again to catch up on the latest in the field or the latest in education. I think that in science, places like NASA have done a very good job of helping teachers to understand enough about the space program that the teachers can teach students. And believe me, in my world, if you've got an 8-year old, the idea of space will motivate them better than most things. So I think it is important. This goes back to what we said earlier on, that lifelong learning is important. It's important for teachers, and we need to provide the resources so that teachers can continue to learn. Because, like you say, science. It seems obvious that we learn new things every day, and they change the way we think about the world. But I think it's equally important in politics or history. I think the more we learn about our own past, the more we understand our own present. I do that on the time scale of the whole Earth, but I think I couldn't understand the United States of America and what's good about it, what needs improvement, without understanding the history that brought us to where we are here now. And so, again, just because the present is itself a moving target, I think we need to help our history teachers to understand how what you know what we know about the past really helps us to understand the present. I think that's what history is for.
That's great. That's great. So, Andrew, we have talked about the students, we have talked about the teachers, we have talked about the parents and the family members. And how about the institution? What are the responsibilities of the institution of building a strong education system? Might be for childhood education or might be for adults. It could be for anyone. So, let's talk about the responsibilities or the qualities that, or might be the resources that institution should provide to this learning system.
Yeah, I think in many of our countries, including my own, responsibility for education goes to government. And so, as voters, we need to ensure that government has its priorities right. Now, I recognize that that's a more challenging thing in some countries than others, but I think nothing will work if the governments that at the end of the day provide the resources for education, if the government isn't interested, and if the government doesn't understand the importance, then there are things that heroic teachers do on the local
Hmm.
scale, but
Hmm.
I think to have a sound educational program for all the citizens of a country, which is frankly what we need to do well over
Hmm.
the next several decades, it takes government commitment. And I would look to, you know, countries in Northern Europe,
Hmm.
Japan, some other parts of Southeast Asia, and
Hmm.
that where governments have made that commitment.
Hmm.
And the result is, educational systems that are really admirable. So it
Hmm.
can be done, and there are examples of countries that do it very, very well. I think one of the things that government can have an important role in is the training of teachers.
Hmm.
So at least in my country, many of the teachers who educate our children go to state-sponsored
Hmm.
universities,
Hmm.
and so we can urge government to take an active role in ensuring excellence in the education
Hmm. Hmm.
of teachers. Um, Trying to think what was on my mind. Um,
Hmm.
Sorry, senior
Take
moment.
your time. Take your time. Take your time.
um, what was I going to say? Oh, I think another thing that's important, and again, when I contrast the United States with, say, countries in Scandinavia, um, in Scandinavia, society actually honors teachers,
Hmm.
and their salaries are quite reasonable. They enjoy good lives. They are appreciated by their their countrymen.
Hmm.
Whereas I would say, to be honest, in the United States, that if you're a bright university student,
Hmm.
chances are you'll be encouraged to do something other than teaching, because
Hmm.
you'll make a better living and things like that. So I think that if it's the value of teaching by a society, and that's not just government, but
Hmm.
by
Hmm.
society as a whole, that when teachers are valued, we
Hmm.
get good teachers.
All right. So I'm gonna ask you one question, Andrew, that is not directly related to the education system, but bit about the politics. This is just to understand that how things work over there in USA. Whenever you are going to cast a vote for any specific political party, how does it go? Do they give you a proper booklet that these are the things that we will do in 5 years, by reading that out and by understanding all the policies what they're going to do, all the steps or the progress they are going to make after 5 years? Is it because of that? Or because how we see in our country, these are just the random promises that we get from the government. These are just the the marketing stuff we do over here on these campaigns for the political parties, and after that we cast the vote for that. How does it go with you in USA?
Well, it's variable. I think at the national level, um, right now it's in a fairly sorry state that each party just tells you what's wrong with the other party rather than having deep consideration of good things for the future. And I think that we as a population really need to force our politicians to focus more on the future. Again, there's this famous saying that if you're a candidate, if you have a program, you talk about the program. If you have a good candidate, you talk about the candidate, and if you don't have a program or a candidate, you talk about the other candidates. And then that, unfortunately, is what happens in the U.S. And for better or for worse, it has worked.
Hmm.
So it's our own fault when we get that. Now, I think the good news is that things like education in the United States are largely controlled at the local level.
Hmm.
So a town or a county will have a major role in education. And there, I think, yeah, in when we have local elections, we expect our
Hmm.
candidates to give their sense of how things could be improved in the future, and we tend to vote on the basis of that.
Hmm. Okay, Andrew, now tell me, what would be your suggestion for the developing countries and the universities and the education system that we have over here? What exactly shall we do so that we could give the best benefit, the benefit that our product, our student are actually, they deserve it. What can we do to make them more productive and to be on track?
Well, that's a good question, and I would hate to be seen as sort of saying what another country should do, but there are some examples of how educational systems have changed remarkably during my lifetime. I think of China, where the government support for education, and therefore, with time, the quality of education has really changed remarkably. And, in China, when I was a boy, 90% of the people in China lived in poverty. Now it's 10%. And a lot of that has to do with making investments in the population, in their education. Again, in science, when I first started out, most Chinese scientists, if they wanted to get ahead, they really had to go to Europe or North America and get their education and learn from scientists in the West. Now, China's a scientific powerhouse. They do wonderful work, and while many of us still collaborate with Chinese scientists, it's a collaboration of equals. So I would say that rather than looking to France or the United Kingdom or Canada or the United States, I think there's a lot that developing countries can learn from looking at places like China, where they have made investments, and it has had a, I think, quite remarkable set of consequences for the population.
Well, Andrew, it was so lovely to listening to you and all the information that you have shared. These were really worth listening to. And I'm really an honor to have this opportunity to talk to you because, trust me, I have learned a lot. I've got a real time exposure after talking to you. It was really an honor for me.
Well, thank you, and I should say I think what you and your colleagues are doing is terrific, and keep it up.
Thank you so very much for that.